Good morning, everyone, and welcome to CDA's CDBG Community Development Block Grant for Program Year 2027 Virtual Capacity Building Training. And we'll introduce our amazing CDA staff here, starting with Rashonda Alexander.
Welcome, everyone. I am Rashonda. Oh, hey. Looks like I may or may not have been muted, but I'm Rashonda Alexander. I serve as Director of Compliance here at CDA. Pass it over to Lisa Jones. You are muted as well, Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Jones. I am Special Assistant for Development. And next, Gul.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gul Fatihi, and I am the Program Manager at CDA. Salu.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Saliu Timbo. I'm the Grants Manager at CDA.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Christy Robson, and I am one of the grants administrators for CDA. I'll pass it along to Amber.
Hi, I'm Amber Norris, and I'm also a grants administrator.
That wraps up our monitoring team, and we also have our fiscal team members on the training with us today. I want to pass it over to Brian Yakum.
Ben.
Hi. Hello. Well, I'm Ben. I'm one of the grants administrators here at the CDA. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Brian Yakum. I'm the fiscal manager at CDA.
Okay. Yeah, I'm unmuted now, I think. And I'm Sharon Worth. I'm the accounting manager in the fiscal section at CDA. I think that's everybody.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
that is. So we are going to get started with letting you know a little bit about who CDA is, and we'll just jump right into the agenda right after that. So the Community Development Administration has a mission to serve as the clearinghouse of federal funds, state and local funds for the city of St. Louis. We deploy funds that drive economic justice, and we support a wide range of private and public entities through their social service endeavors, building affordable housing, activating vacant properties, beautifying neighborhoods, and in general, empowering communities. Toward that end, we have three tenets: to empower, develop, and help transform the city of St. Louis. A little bit about CDA's history. In 1974, CDA was founded, and the goal was to administer the funds for the Housing and Community Development Act. And over time, it evolved from one into three organizations and development agencies: SLGC in 1988, PDA in 1999, and the Affordable Housing Commission in 2001. HUD intervened following a monitoring visit in 2012, and then they just requested that CDA redesign its funding processes to reduce some automatic influence and to ensure an open and competitive selection. And that is exactly what this process is. We are here for the FY27 CDBG cycle. And it is open and it is a competitive process. So we're going to do our absolute best to help you understand what the 2027 CDBG RFP is at a glance. We'll give you some best practices to set you up for success. We'll talk about some general requirements and the need for organizational capacity, financial management, and at the end, we'll set up for Q&A as Tom just put into the chat. Our timeline, we've posted it initially back in July, on July 1st. Fast forward to today, we are here for our training. And I know we saw a few of our people in the with us online today during our RFP overview at the end of July. The big date is when proposals are due, and that's toward the end of this month on August the 24th. That's by 4 p.m. So you want to make sure that you have registered in eGrams and that you have your proposals in on time, no exceptions. Proposals are due on August 24th by 4 p.m., no exceptions. Then we go through some funding recommendations where we post after we've rated and reviewed all of the proposals. You will find that posting on the CDA website on October the 2nd of 2026. We will go through the official process with our Board of Aldermen to create a board bill and subsequent ordinance for this funding. And then we will submit the final action plan to HUD for 2027. Next slide.
Alrighty, next we will discuss the CDBG overview. The Community Development Block Grant CDBG program provides funds to municipalities and other units of government around the country to develop viable urban communities. This is accomplished by providing affordable, decent housing, creating suitable living environments, and expanding economic opportunities principally for low and moderate income persons. All activities must be consistent with one or more of the following HUD national objectives. So it can be principally benefits low and moderate income persons, prevents and eliminates slums or blight, and addresses an urgent need or problem in the community, for an example, a natural disaster. The RFP is now available for download on the CDA website at the email listed below. The proposal deadline for the 2027 RFP is 4 p.m. on Monday, August 24th. All proposals must be submitted online in eGrams at the email listed below. No late applications will be accepted. This RFP is for nonprofits or municipal entities proposing to conduct non-housing activities. Geographic target areas are the NORSA, which is the neighborhood revitalization strategy areas. All questions related to the proposal forms, supporting documentation, and funding process must be submitted no later than 4 p.m. on August 14, 2026 via email listed below. CDA will provide answers in writing and post frequently asked questions and answers on the CDA website listed below. Questions pertaining to eGrams only may be submitted up to 12 p.m. on August 21st, 2026. eGrams questions must be submitted via email to the one listed. No questions will be taken or answered by telephone or by a direct contact with a CDA staff person. So now we'll discuss CDBG RFP, and we will go over general requirements, will be nonprofit and capacity. We will discuss registration and clearances, and those include the EIN, the UEI, SAM.gov, E-Verify, and CBI. We will discuss insurance and bonding, and we will go over the coverage and the limits. We will review of key policies and procedures, and those include the conflict of interest, non-discrimination, and grievance. We will discuss construction requirements, which will discuss the public improvement or facility activities, site control, project schedule, construction budget, photos and construction resume, design documents, environmental assessment, procurements, WBE, MBE, Davis-Bacon, and Section 3. Remember that you must be a public or private nonprofit agency or organization. You must be in good standing with the state of Missouri, and you can search for the state Secretary of State at the email listed. With your application, you will need to upload the Certificate of Good Standing from the Missouri Secretary of State, the IRS 501c3 determination letter, and the current IRS 990 or the automatic approved extension. If funded, additional documents will be needed before you can enter into a contract with CDA. So you will need to include the state tax exempt letter, the state seal certificate of incorporation, along with a copy of the articles of incorporation. You would need a copy of the board of directors bylaws and a completed CDA board list with current board members, job titles, employers, mailing addresses, business owned, and race ethnicity information. Organizations must have the capacity to undertake the proposed activities. So bylaws must be authorized by types of activities proposed in your application. And you must demonstrate with the board, staff, and or partner agencies have the capacity to show how the work will be done. And again, all of the documents listed below you will need before you enter into a contract with CDA. And those include the state tax exempt letter, the state seal certificate of incorporation, along with a copy of the articles of incorporation, a copy of the board of directors bylaws, and a completed CDA board list with current board of directors, job titles, employees, mailing addresses, business owned, and race ethnicity information. Remember, and a reminder, application deadlines. No applications submitted, well, only applications submitted via egrams at the email listed will be accepted. All proposals submitted after the closing date and time of 4 p.m. Central Standard Time on Monday, August 24th, 2026 will not be reviewed and no exceptions will be granted. Now I pass it along to Sayu.
Thank you, Christy, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I am going to talk you through the CDBG best practices, and this is going to help you understand some of the key section of the RFP and what CDA is looking for in your responses and some of the common mistakes that we see during the application review process. Let's start with the CDBG background and national objectives. When you are developing your proposal, this is one of the first areas you should review. You want to make sure that the activity you are proposing fits within the CDBG program requirements. Most importantly, your proposed activity has to meet the CDBG national objective. If your activity does not meet a national objective, that application cannot be funded. We'll want you to look at the CD priorities and eligible activity. This section is important because it identifies the CD priorities for the funding cycle and the activities that are eligible. So before you invest significant time into your application, make sure you propose activity fits within an eligible priority. We want you to use the RFP instructions as your checklist. Once you've completed your application, go back through the instruction and make sure you have addressed every requirement. Some of the requirements are particularly important because failing to meet them can result in an application being disqualified. So the takeaway here is read the instruction carefully and follow them. And remember, questions regarding the RFP should be submitted through the designated CDA email address you see on the screen. Next. Moving on to the acknowledgement and certification section. This may look simple part of the application, but make sure it is completed correctly. The certification must be signed by someone who is authorized to sign on behalf of your agency. And that could be your executive director, the board president, or another properly designated individual. Before submitting, make sure the person signing the actually has the authority to certify the application. Now let's talk about organizational profile and specifically the UEI and SAM.gov. One common mistake is agencies submitting application without resolving problems with their UIE or SAM.gov registration. Please don't wait until the application deadline to discover that your registration has expired, that there is an issue and that needs to be resolved. We recommend you to periodically check your your organization on sam.gov during the application and review period. Also check your expiration dates. If your registration is going to expire during the funding process, take care of the renewal early and start resolving any issue now. Next slide. Just to provide a little more context of the sam.gov, this is a federal government systems for managing entity registration. Your agency can use sam.gov to register, update or review its registration, check its status, and review entity and exclusion information. Next slide, please. Now we are moving into the organization narrative section. This is your opportunity. This is where you want to tell CDA about your organization and demonstrate your capacity. Think about the section as an opportunity to answer the question. For example, like, what's your organization capable of successfully carrying out the activity? Your response can affect your overall rating. You want to provide enough information to demonstrate your capacity without overwhelming the reviewer. Be comprehensive, but also be precise. Make sure you identify all required license, and most importantly, be persuasive when explaining your organizational capacity. Your proposed activity should also make sense in relation to your organizational mission, purpose, and existing services. If you are proposing something that is significantly different from the services your organization is normally provides, we want you to explain that clearly and demonstrate why your organization is still qualified to carry out this activity. Next. Now we are looking at the grant administration, history, and personnel. For organizations that have not previously been funded by CDA, a letter of recommendation from a previous funder is required. For organizations who currently funded by CDA, that letter is optional. For personnel, make sure you identify all existing proposed position that will involve with proposed activity. But both the resume and the job description are required when submitting your application. If this position is vacant when submitting your application, you don't need to provide a resume for that position, but you still need to provide a job description. Also keep in mind that if you are funded by CDA and you have a to be hired position, there are additional equal employment opportunity requirements and CDA approval requirements before those costs can be considered CDBG eligible. Some common mistakes we see, and these includes failing to submit a required resume and job description, and failing to identify all staff who are involved in administering, managing, or operating the CDBG activity is one common mistake you want to avoid. Even if you are not charging, for example, if you are not charging, let's say, the CFO salaries to the CDBG activity, if that person is involved in managing the CDBG activity, the position should still be identified in the application. Also, do not put subcontractors in personnel section. Subcontractors belong under the contractual and professional services line in the activity budgets. This simply means that you have to put the subcontractor under the activity budgets line, contractual professional services. The next slide is a continuation. Next. Yes, the next slide is a continuation of the organizational background. One important thing to remember is that information you provide about your staff here will carry over into the more detailed personnel schedule later in the application. So make sure your information is consistent. If you identified any position or staffing structure in this section, that information should also align with when you are completing the personnel schedule section. Next slide. Now let's move into financial management. Under the financial management section, first, you are required to provide a copy of your organization most recently submitted IRS form 990. For organization with fiscal year ending June 30th, the filing deadline is November 15. For fiscal year ending December 31st, the deadline is May 15. Take note of this. If your form 990 is not current, please make sure you have an approved extension from IRS, and make sure you provide the documentation of that approved extension with your application. When you are submitting your application, you have to include this document. One common mistake is submitting an outdated form 990 without the documentation showing that an extension was approved. And another common mistake is not identifying financial staff in the personnel description and the resume section. Next slide, please. Continue with the financial management. This section is really about demonstrating that your organization has the financial systems and internal controls necessary to properly manage the federal funding. When asking this section, don't just tell us about your internal controls. Explain what those controls are and how you work towards. The goal is to demonstrate appropriate financial management system and internal controls when managing federal funds. Some common mistakes are if you did not provide sufficient explanation demonstrating adequate segregation of major accounting function. For example, who approves expenditure processes or records, you have to provide an explanation for this. Also explain the role of your board of directors in financial oversight. Don't simply say the board, for example, the board provides oversight. You need to explain what type of oversight the board provides. Please remember that the quality of your responses can affect your rating under the agency financial qualification category. Next slide. Now we are looking at the audit requirement. If your organization is required to have a single audit, you need to provide the most recently completed audit. The presentation identifies the single audit threshold as 1 million, and audit reports are generally due to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse within 9 months after organizational fiscal year end. You should also be able to explain how your organization ensures compliance with the federal audit requirements and this is required. I also encourage you to familiarize yourself with the uniform administration requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements under the 2 FCR Part 20 Subpart F. One common mistake is not demonstrating sufficient knowledge of the audit process. For example, if your organization should understand how to audit its project, how the audit is procured and selected, so these are all examples. So we want you to provide a sufficient knowledge about your audit process. Next slide. If your organization has audit finding, don't simply submit the audit and leave the findings unexplained. Identify the findings and explain whether they are open or resolved. We also want you to provide a brief explanation of what the findings was, including any question caused, what corrective actions was taken, and then where the issues currently stand. One common mistake is not providing enough information to demonstrate that the deficiencies has been addressed. Moving into the operating budget, make sure you categorize your organization funding sources and expenses according to the line items on the form. Please be remembered to include your fiscal year beginning and ending dates. Next slide, please. Now we are moving from the organizational information into the proposed activity itself, which is these proposed activities is captured under the activity cover sheet when you are looking at the RFP. One important point here is that separate and distinct activities generally require separate proposal. If you are proposing the same type of activity at multiple locations, you may be able to include those locations within one proposal. But if you are proposing two distinctly different activities, for example, an after-school program and a daycare center, that should be treated as a separate activity. Similarly, if you're proposing both facility rehabilitation and a food pantry in the same building, those are separate activities. So the key thing I want you to take from this example is to carefully define your activity before completing the application. Also, when completing the cover sheet, make sure you are selecting the appropriate priority and eligible activity, and make sure the contact person listed for the activity is actually the primary contact for that proposed activity. Next slide. Now, we are going to talk about your activity name and the summary and the funding request. First, be realistic and reasonable about the amount you are requesting. The minimum amount you should be requesting is 25,000 as the minimum for CDBG request. Your activity name should be clearly and descriptive. Someone should be able to look at the name and understand generally what the activity is, and the activity summary is limited to 100 words. Use those words carefully, and make sure that the summary tells us the activity name, the purpose, the location, the service area, the target population, and the number of people you expect to serve. Also, we want you to remember that the activity name and summary become part of your contract if you are funded for the CDBG activity. Not including all addresses and location for proposed activity is also another a common mistake that we identify when we are reviewing application. And then another mistake is activity does not adequately summarized, and is one mistake that we also identified. And then another mistake is activity as political or religious reference other than language inappropriate for contract name. So these are all mistakes you want to avoid when you are completing your application. This section, this is one of the most important section of the application. Your activity description. You need to clearly explain the program design. A simple way to think about it is using the 4 Ws. One is For example, who are you serving? What are you doing? When when are you going to do it, or how will you do it? So make sure you use the 4Ws as as a way of designing your program. We should be able to understand exactly what you are proposing without making any assumption. If the program design is not adequately explained, it can be negatively affect the scores, the rating that we are doing. So please make sure you explain your program design clearly so that we understand what you are doing and who are the people you are serving. You also need to connect the activity to the application national objective, and make sure your service area is clearly defined. One tip is when using the area benefit, if you are funded by CDA, CDA will only reimburse you for city low to moderate income participants in the activity. And when you are using the area benefit national objective subcategory 1D, the number of beneficiary under 2A will be the number of low to moderate income individuals residing in that area. Be sure to fully describe the service area in your proposal, includes census tracts, neighborhood, and zip codes. Now let's talk about the goals and output. This is also very important when you are completing your application. Your output should directly relate to what you are proposing to do. The allowable outputs identified here are two: persons and households. Output should be directly related to the proposed activities. Output should be measurable. Whatever number you propose needs to be measurable and realistic. CDBG reimbursement is tied to a measurable output or outcome. So tracking and documentation are extremely important in this area. I really want to remind everyone here that CDBG funding administered by CDA is provided on a reimbursement basis. So CDA does not provide the CDBG award as an upfront payment to any agency. Please take note of this. The basic process, for example, if you are funded and as an agency, you have to incur an eligible expenses, and you have to provide supporting documentation to CDA, and then CDA will review the expenses, CDA approves the reimbursement, and CDA reimburse the agency. So this CDBG activity is based on reimbursement, not as an upfront payment. Tracking and evaluation is very important. So demonstrate successes at the end of the grant. HUD expects measurable and quantifiable results. Please note that don't establish a goal simply because it sounds impressive. Instead, be prepared to propose your justified per unit cost base and propose outputs. Be realistic in your goal setting. And when you are determining reasonableness, please, we want you to analyze the per unit cost. So it's going to be cleared in the application. Let's look at an example of why the per unit cost matters. For example, organization XYZ, organization requests 200,000 for a summer program and propose to serve 25 children for 3 months. When you divide the funding by the number of children, the cost is 8,000 per child. And when you further look at the 3 months period, the cost is approximately 2,675 per child and per month. So the question is simply, can you calculate the number? This question is, for example, is the cost, ask yourself if is the cost reasonable for this activity and the services being provided. So you have to ask yourself if this cost is reasonable for the services you are planning to provide. For agencies that are proposing um, to work on public improvement or facilities activities, these are considerations that you need to pay attention to. First, you have to document site control in the name of the entity applying for the funding. If the property is city-owned, you should have the appropriate buying from the municipal holding the entity before applying. Also pay attention to the project schedule, the presentation identified projects currently under the construction or plan to begin construction before June 26 as not eligible for CDBG funding. Construction budget tips. Professionally prepare a construction budget. Do not take your projects out to the bid. If CDA, you receive funding from CDA, whoever prepares the construction budget cannot compete in the sealed bid process. One important thing you need to note is if you are funded solicitation of general contractors without CDA preliminary approval will result in either rebidding the project or withdrawing of the funding of the CDBG funds. Now let's talk about environmental review. If you are proposing a construction or acquisition project, environmental review is really important. It's an important requirement. If you are funded, any construction work or closing on a site acquisition without completion of an environmental review by CDA will automatically result in the withdrawal of the CDBG funding. Note on multiple funding source. This is important because CDBG funding alters all other fundings. All funding must adhere to the most stringent set of regulations. This section focuses on other funding and the activity budget. You should always be seeking to leverage the CDBG funding. Show how the CDBG funds will be leveraged. Be realistic in your budget projections. An additional tip for this is activity budget line should be greater than or equal to the proposed CDBG amount. Please make sure your total expenses should not exceed your total revenue. The expense budget and the total revenue budget must match. For local travel, this says identify the city reimbursed rate of 0.595 per mile, and this is subject to change. Also, we want you to pay attention to procurement requirement, and this has to do with any activities that has to do with contractual and professional services, supplies, equipment, and printing may require CDA procurement and contract approval at 15,000 or more. And that is to say, if you provide a contract, the activities is 15,000 and more, and this has to go through procurement process and CDA has to approve. Next. And for personnel cost, remember that there are documentation and compliance requirements, including timesheet, conflict of interest form, secondary employment form, and the applicable EEO approval for new hires. Before I wrap up my slides, I would like to highlight some of few common budget mistakes. And one is not including leverage funds into the activity budgets if they were declared in the budget narrative. Not providing a description of each of your line items is also considered as one common mistakes, and including contractual workers under personnel cost instead of professional service is one very important mistake that we have been identified when we are reviewing application. Thank you. Over to you, Amber.
Thank you, Salu. Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us. We have more to go, but try to stay with us and we'll get you through this as quickly as possible. So earlier, we mentioned the personnel description and resumes section where you provide the resumes and job descriptions of all staff involved in any way with the activity. Fortunately, that chart will automatically populate the names, titles, full or part-time, and percentage of their time charged to CDBG into the personnel schedules, where the amount of personnel expenses to be charged to the grant is calculated. Reminder that all staff that have anything to do with the activity need to be on the personnel schedule, even if their position is not funded with CDBG dollars. So the admin, financial, management, operational, and program staff that work at all on the activity should all be on the personnel schedule. There is a schedule for full-time staff and another for part-time staff. You add the staff's actual salary per pay period, the number of pay periods in the year, and the form calculates the total CDBG share of that person's pay for the year. Double check that the percent charged to CDBG is correct from the previous section where you entered it. Then it adds up the total salaries and calculates the appropriate amount of FICA taxes for you. Then there are fields for filling in benefits like health insurance, life insurance, retirement, etc. If you include benefits, they must be at a percent less than or equal to the percent of salary that you're charging to CDBG. Conveniently, the total charge to CDBG for all the personnel expenses calculates at the bottom and automatically populates into the proposed activity budget. And eGrams will show you an error if you end up with a personnel total that makes you go over the grant amount. Next slide, please. Here's an example. A reminder that column C, as you see it on the slide, is for the actual salary per pay period. Make sure you enter the total number of pay periods for the entire year in column E under number of pay periods, and double check that the percent charged to CDBG is correct. That is in column D. Next slide, please. And here's an example of the totals with taxes and benefits. FICA is done automatically. The benefits fields are where you can adjust how much in benefits are charged to CDBG to make the whole thing reach the proper total. But make sure the percentage of the benefits is less than the percent of total salaries charged to CDBG. Next slide, please. Here's some tips for your personnel schedule. Be sure, the example on this slide is actually of the part-time personnel schedule. It's slightly different than the full-time schedule in that instead of putting the full salary per pay period, you're entering that person's hourly rate in column C, or under rate. And then in column D, under total number of annual activity hours, you're putting the total hours for the entire year for that staff person. And then ensure under column F that the percent inserted from that previous section with the resumes and job descriptions, that percentage has translated correctly to this chart. A common mistake is not inserting the total hours to be paid for the entire year. So be sure to pay attention to that column. Next slide. Yep. Regular employees only go on the personnel schedule. Contractors go under the professional services line in the proposed activity budget. Note that if the total you plan to pay an individual vendor or contractor for professional services using CDBG funds, if that amount equals $15,000 or more, you have to follow the procurement procedures and have a formal contract with that vendor. Next slide, please. Next in the application is the proposed reimbursement analysis. To reiterate what Salu has shared, these grant awards are provided on a reimbursement basis. Funds are not provided up front. The agency must be able to cover expenses as they are incurred and then request reimbursement for those expenses after the fact. Furthermore, for most non-construction activities, we reimburse you based on units of service, not invoices or actual expenses, although you should still keep all of that documentation. The application's reimbursement analysis is designed to tie grant funds to grant outputs through calculation of what we call units of service and per unit costs. Your outputs are where you document the total units of service you will provide. In other words, your goals for how many units of service you will provide for the year. Each output should have only one unit of service goal. For example, you set the goal to deliver 70,000 meals to seniors, 70,000 being the total units of service. In the reimbursement analysis, there is a field for defining the unit of service, what a unit is, in our example, meals, and how you determined your goal, the 70,000. This definition should include the actual calculations for determining the goal and any assumptions you make. I'll show you an example in a moment. Make sure the definition and calculations are clear. And now we should be on the slide for proposed reimbursement analysis. Yes, thank you. You enter the units of service total or goal in the reimbursement chart, then the total amount of the CDBG funds you want to apply to reaching that goal. And the chart calculates your unit of service cost, which is how much CDA will reimburse you for every unit, like for every meal delivered. In determining your total units, total CDBG amount, and unit of service costs, consider the following: the lifespan of the contract, how frequently you need reimbursements, the total grant amount you are requesting, making sure the definition of the total units and per unit cost is reasonable, and what are eligible program expenses. Reminder that each unit of service goal must be related to an output. Next slide, please. We have a few examples of the reimbursement analysis for a few different types of programs to hopefully make this clear for as many people as possible. This first example is for a beautification program located in a low to moderate income neighborhood. So this could be a program that cleans up alleys or mows vacant lots or other activities to beautify a neighborhood. Say this program is requesting $25,000 in funding. This agency finds it easiest to measure the service they provide by project, beautification projects in this case. Say they estimate they can run 10 beautification projects in the year of the contract. So one project may be cleaning up a certain number of alleys during a weekend event with volunteers. Project 2 may be a different set of alleys on another weekend, etc. Their goal is to complete 10 such projects during the year. That's their total units of service. To calculate the cost per unit, they just divide the grant amount they're requesting, $25,000, by the goal of 10 projects, which means each project, the cost per unit, will be reimbursed at $2,500 in grant funds. Quick note that if your activity falls under the area benefit national objective, the number of beneficiaries will be the number of low to moderate individuals residing in the service area. Next slide, please. Here's our meals example, a senior Meals on Wheels program that is requesting $75,000. This agency estimates that they will be able to serve a total of 100 seniors during the year. That's 100 unique individuals, or what we call unduplicated participants. Meaning, you can serve each participant more than once, but when you count the number of participants you serve for output and demographic purposes, you count each person only once. This agency delivers 2 meals per day to each senior, so it makes sense to define their unit as a meal. They provide those meals 7 days a week for 50 weeks of the year. To determine how many meals or units they will likely provide through the whole year, they must multiply the 100 seniors by the 2 meals per day, by 7 days a week, by 50 weeks a year, which is 70,000 total meals or total units. Next, they need to calculate how much they should be reimbursed for each meal or unit. They take their request amount, divide it by the unit goal of 70,000, and that gives them the per unit cost of $1.07 per meal. When filling out the reimbursement analysis chart, all of that information, including the assumptions and the actual math equations, need to be in the description cell so we at CDA can understand how you decided on 70,000 meals for $1.07 each. That allows us to determine if your goal and unit cost are reasonable. Example 3 is for an after-school program for low-income youth requesting $100,000. This is a situation in which it is harder to estimate the number of participants or amount of services because students frequently come and go from after-school programs because they get sick or they have appointments, etc. So how do you determine a reasonable goal? This agency knows it served about 150 unique youth last year, and they think that it's a reasonable estimate for this year. They also know from last year that every day the after-school program ran, they had the capacity to serve 120 youth at a given time. But the average daily attendance was only 80% of that, or about 96 of the 120 students were there on a given day. They decide it makes the most sense to define their unit of service as 1 day of attendance of a given student, or in other words, daily attendance. So they get reimbursed every time a student attends the program. There are 180 school days in the year, so they calculate 180 times the average daily attendance of 96, which equals an expectation to provide 17,280 in total daily attendance for the year. The per unit rate will be the request amount, 100,000, divided by the total units, 17,280, which equals $5.79 reimbursed for every time each student attends the program. Next slide, please. Yes. Our last example is one where there is more than one total units goal because there is more than one output. That means there will also be more than one per unit rate. This is a job training program for low to moderate income ex-offenders that has 2 phases of training to complete. And not all participants complete both phases or even one phase. They're requesting $100,000. They estimate they will serve a total of 75 unique or unduplicated participants during the year, but only 60 of them are likely to complete the first phase of the training, and only 50 will go on to complete the second phase, which means they need 2 goals. One to serve 60 clients during phase 1, and another to serve 50 clients during phase 2. This also means their unit of service is the number of participants served in a given phase instead of daily attendance, like in the after-school program. They could have used daily attendance, but number of participants served is also okay. With 2 total unit goals, do you apply the entire award amount to only one of the outputs? No, you can split the award among the outputs as seems appropriate. The effort and resources to provide each phase of this job training is basically the same, so the agency decides to split the award 50-50, applying 50,000 to phase 1 and 50,000 to phase 2. The per unit rate will be different though, because the total unit goals are different. 50,000 divided by 60 participants or units is $833 per participant or unit. And 50,000 divided by 50 participants or units is $1,000 per participant or unit. Note that there needs to be one total unit goal per output. So this program has two outputs, one for phase 1 and one for phase 2. And in the outputs criteria section, each output will have its own specific criteria listed. Next slide, please. Finally, that completes the application sections. We'll now go over some of the attachments that must be provided with the application, some registrations you need to complete, and then some documents you must be prepared to provide if you are funded. First, attachments you must upload to the application. Remember in that personnel description and resume section, you must provide 3 things. 1, an organizational chart for your agency. 2, a resume for every staff person involved in any way with the proposed activity. And 3, a job description for every staff person involved in any way with the proposed activity. Make sure you provide all 3 of those things, an org chart and for every relevant staff member, a resume and job description. Lastly, if your agency has not been funded by CDA before, you must also provide a letter of recommendation from a previous funder. Next slide, please. At the end of the application, you must certify that there are no conflicts of interest that will arise through use of federal funds. We'll discuss conflict of interest more later. Also, these funds may not be used to support religious activities, political activities, or lobbying activities. Next slide, please. Add to your to-do list now 3 things you will need for your application. In the application, you must provide your organization's EIN, sometimes called a federal tax ID. If you do not have one yet, you need to apply for one online through the IRS. It is free and can be started through the link in the slide. Note that tax-exempt organizations must already be formed legally before you can apply for an EIN. You can contact the IRS if you have questions about that process. Next, you must also provide your org's UEI number on the application. A UEI number, or Unique Entity Identifier number, replaced what used to be called a DUNS number a few years ago. Having a DUNS number is no longer sufficient. You must acquire a UEI number, which can be done for free on sam.gov. While you are requesting your UEI number on sam.gov, go ahead and complete the sam.gov registration for contracting with or receiving grants from the federal government. The registration is required, and CDA will check for it if you are funded. Next slide, please. Through your sam.gov registration, you and CDA can check that your agency is not debarred from working with the federal government or that you have any active exclusions. You and CDA can also check if you have any delinquent federal taxes. You want to register and check these things before applying so you can resolve any such issues, because we cannot award funds if you are debarred, have active exclusions, or are delinquent. sam.gov registration does take time, so start now so you have what you need before the grant application deadline. Next slide, please. If you are funded, you must also register with E-Verify and submit documentation. Statute requires enrollment and participation in a federal work authorization program with respect to the employees working in connection with the contracted service. You cannot knowingly employ any person who is an unauthorized alien in connection with the contracted services. Go to everify.gov to register. Next slide, please. Before you apply, make sure you have either a current city business license or an approved exemption from the license if you are a nonprofit. We ask that you upload that license or exemption to the application. If you are funded, the agency must be able to pass a CBI clearance, a City of St. Louis Central Business Index clearance, which checks that you have a current business license or exempt and are current on all local taxes. Agencies cannot have any delinquent federal, state, or local taxes to receive funding. There is the phone number for the city's license collector on the slide for more information about business licenses or exemptions, and the collector of revenue number for local taxes information. Next slide, please. Lastly, if you are funded, you must have and provide proof of certain insurances and bonding coverage covering the full term of the contract. These are the current requirements, required insurance and their current limit requirements, but note that these are subject to change. Currently, you must have comprehensive general liability insurance at least $1 million per occurrence. Vehicle liability, even if the agency does not own a vehicle, you still must have vehicle liability at least $500,000 per occurrence. Workers' compensation, as required by Missouri state statute. You can see, follow the link in the slide if you need more info on that. And you must submit a certificate of insurance for these policies that names the City of St. Louis, care of CDA, as an additional insured at this exact address, 1520 Market Street, Suite 2000, St. Louis, Missouri, 63103. Program monitors like me and the comptroller's office will check every one of these details and reject the certificate of insurance if anything is incorrect. So make sure you have the types, limits, and additional insured with this address correct. Sometimes small agencies ask if they really have to get these insurance because they can be costly, but insurance requirements are not set by CDA. They are set by the city and cannot be waived. Next slide, please. You also need a commercial blanket bond, sometimes called an honesty bonding or crime coverage, which essentially protects you from employee theft. Your coverage must be at least $25,000 per occurrence, and all persons employed and or authorized to perform any functions related to the CDBG program must be covered, including the executive director, board members with signatory authority, financial officers and staff, and CDBG program staff. You will have to submit proof of bonding if you are funded. That completes my section. I want to pass it over to Ben.
Thank you, Amber. Here we go. Hi. Thanks again, Amber. Good afternoon. I will be discussing the required CDBG policies and procedures. Written policies and procedures are essential for the effective operations of any organizations. So organizations will need to provide a copy of the personnel policies and procedure manual prior to entering into a contract with CDA. With CDA-funded programs, established policies and procedures can also help you ensure that you comply with HUD regulations and CDA requirements. It's important to have written procedures for more than just one, personnel issues. For example, you may have one for the job training program, an intake procedure to verify eligibility and clients' data, a procedure to track program data, attendance, job placements, canceling sessions, and a file retention policy. These are extremely important for new programs. If you're funded, there are several policies that must be submitted prior, before you can enter into a contract with CDA, and those are specifically grievance policy, conflict of interest policy, and a non-discrimination policy, and this must be written and documented. The grievance policy. And organizations must have a written grievance policy pertaining to their employees. Organization must have a written grievance policy that allows for the resolutions of any complaints related to the CDBG program, and should include, not limited to, specifying response procedures, time frame, staff person responsible for handling grievances. Should also address complaints of discrimination complaints when they feel I can't quite get there. Hold on a second. That they, excuse me, I'm just going to go to this particular page. I can't quite get a page on my screen there, but there you go. When they feel deprived of the benefits offered under the CDBG program, they must incorporate specific items and deadlines. Still in the grievance policy, complaints of discrimination. When an applicant, participant, or registrant believes that he or she or any specific class of individuals has been or is being subjected to discrimination. Federally protected classes, race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, familial status, or political affiliation. There is a website in the city of St. Louis which contains any additional protected classes, and the website is shown on the slide. You must forward all discrimination complaints to the CDA Executive Director within 2 working days of the initial complaint. Again, on the grievance policy, program complaints. When an applicant, participant, or registrant feels deprived of the benefits offered under the CDBG programs, the agency should make every reasonable effort to resolve any legitimate deficiencies identified by the complainant within 15 working days of the initial complaint. If the agency cannot satisfactorily resolve the complaint in this time frame, it must forward the complaint to CDA Executive Director within 2 working days of the exhaustion of the remedies available to the agency in its grievance policy. Conflict of interest. Regulation applies during the person's tenure and for 1 year thereafter. HUD may grant an exception to a conflict of interest on a case-by-case basis, providing that the agency must request an exception in writing to CDA before the conflict of interest occurs. An opinion of CDA's attorney that the exception does not violate state or local law. And public disclosure of the conflict is required in a general circulation newspaper and will be paid for by the person with the conflict. For instance, the conflict of interest could be the son of a board member that was hired as the program coordinator for the CDBG funded after school program, or maybe a senior center as a board member who participates in CDBG funded exercise programs at the center. The executive director of the CDBG funded food pantry also owns an accounting company which has been awarded a contract to provide accounting services. It's all conflict of interest which we're trying to avoid. Continuing that particular topic, organizations must maintain a written code or standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest. Board members, executive director, staff paid with CDBG funds, staff involved with the management, administration, procurement will be required to sign a conflict of interest form. CDBG funded staff will be required to sign both a conflict of interest and an employee secondary employment questionnaire 63. The non-discrimination policy. Agencies awarded funding must comply with the intent of this policy, required to develop a written procedure which incorporates CDA's non-discriminatory policy, still required to comply with all equal opportunity laws and or regulations contained in your contract with CDA. The following items I'm going to mention are also needed for your application. The IRS 501c3 determination letter, which includes your federal tax ID, the UEI number, certificate of good standing from the Missouri Secretary of State, the current IRS 990, 990 or automatic approved extension, resumes and job descriptions for staff involved in the administration, operation, and or management of the proposed program, organizational chart, and a letter of recommendation from a previous funder, if not previously funded by CDA. Also, you will need to provide a state tax exempt letter, a state sealed certificate of incorporation, along with a copy of the articles of incorporation, bylaws, completed CDA board list, signed conflict of interest forms for all board members, personnel funded with CDBG funds, and anyone involved in the administration of the CDBG program. Secondary employment forms signed by all CDBG funded personnel, E-Verify registration, CBI clearance, and SAM.gov, which my previous colleague also went through those. The other items which you have to provide before we can enter into any contracts with you is the insurance certificate, general liability, vehicle liability, workers' compensation, bonding, dishonesty, crime bonding, grievance policy, conflict of interest policy, non-discrimination policy, personnel policies and procedure manual, and living wage affidavit. I think at this stage, I'm going to pass the microphone to Gul, who will be the next person to go through these construction requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. So again, this is Gul Fatihi. I will go over to the construction part of the application if you plan to apply for a construction projects. The definition of construction here, since in our department, we're not working on a residential construction, all activities are non-residential, which includes publicly owned facilities, infrastructure such as street, playground, underground facilities, and also those facilities that are owned by nonprofit and open to the general public. And all eligible activities under the CDBG program is the construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, acquisition, installation of public facilities, and improvement. And the maintenance activities are not eligible under the CDBG program. Oh, sorry, my mic was a little away from my mouth. Can you hear me well? Perfect. And also make sure, since it was also mentioned through the presentation, that the national objectives is a very one important point that you have to mention that the national objective, which is typically low to moderate income individual or area benefit that you will be serving under the CDBG program. Construction requirement. The main requirements for the construction program is when you're applying for a construction project, you have to provide the proof of site control. That could be a deed, lease with allowance that allows you for the rehabilitation, and also LRA option if that's applicable. Or if you're leasing a property, the owner should provide allowance of the rehabilitation, and that could be the deed or a LORA, which is land use restriction agreement. And if you acquire the property during the construction, before we start the construction, the title should be cleared and provided to the CDA. And also, if the site is owned by city or any entity within the city, the applicant should provide the interaction and communication that they have with the city entity. That could be the Parks and Recreation Department, PBS, or any other holding entity from the city. And also, when you're starting the construction, that title should be under the name of the applicant. A timetable that outline the start and end date for every milestone is very important, that you have to provide the schedule based on your construction milestone, the start date and the end date. And that's a very important, so we can track your activity when you are awarded this agreement. make sure, keep in mind, since this is a construction project, the environmental review will take longer than the other public service projects, and that could take up to 6 months, and some of the project maybe more than 6 months. Just be patient for that. Construction requirement, design document, photo, construction budget, and resume. When you're applying for a construction project under the CDBG program, you have to provide us with a preliminary drawing and a scope of work. We don't need a comprehensive, detailed drawing and also comprehensive scope of work at the beginning, but if your project is selected, we may request you more when we conduct the environmental review based on the scope of that project. And in that case, because we need to run the Section 106 Historic Preservation Act, and that time we need more detailed drawing, pictures, and also scope of work. And if you're working on a public infrastructure like street, underground utilities, since you'll be disturbing the ground, we might also require to run the SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office approval. So that takes longer time. We need photos of existing building, area of construction that help us if your facility is happen to be in a historically preserved area, that will help us to report to the HUD for up to what extent you will be disturbing the historic elevation, either that will be approved or not approved by HUD. And also for picture taking diagram for Section 106, you can use the city website and there is a guideline for you how to professionally take these pictures. And also we also need the professionally prepared construction budget. This is not your bid document. The construction budget is different. So for that, you can use Proforma, which you can find it on our CDA website. And that will help you to navigate through all these construction and total development costs. We also need a construction resume. That is not your employment or employee's resume. These are your organization experience with the construction projects, that how much experience you have, what type of project you implemented, the date of the project, the address of the project, the scope of the project, and the architect, your GCs, your construction costs, total development costs, and square footage of the area that you rehab. Procurement. The procurement is generally the same for our construction and non-construction project at CDA. We follow the same guideline and procedure. So effective October 1st, 2025, our threshold moved from 10,000 to 15,000. So what does this mean? All procurement under 15,000 count as a micro procurement that you are allowed to do by yourself and use your own judgment. But above 15,000, you need the CDA approval, and you have to request a procurement approval, and we will ask for the document you provide, and then we provide the approval. And if your scope of the project or the specific task is above 15,000 and you're procuring, you have to release an RFP. But prior to release or advertising the RFP, you have to send that for review and approval to CDA. We will approve it, review it, and if we need to change something, we will put our recommendation. The RFP must contain CDBG contract provision, funding statement, CDBG supplemental contract provision, and when applicable, Section 3, Davis-Bacon, and BABA. The formal advertising and sealed bid should be in advertising at least for 30 days and must be posted on general circular paper, minority paper, and with crossroad plenum. And also you have to select the lowest bid when reasonable. If you does not select the lowest bid, you have to provide a clear justification, and CD will review that and will approve by case. Davis-Bacon. This is under the HUD provision. Any public facility improvement construction project that award above $2,000 in federal funding, they should comply with this provision. And all construction worker must be paid a prevailing wage, documented by certified payroll, and also reviewed, submitted to CDA. And CDA will interview the worker to confirm their wages. If applicable, a signed memorandum of agreement that will sign the indicating who will monitor Davis-Bacon requirement must be issued prior to the CDA preliminary approval of the RFP. The MOA may be required when there in two cases. If the federal funds are utilized, if the other federal funds are utilized, and also the site owned by Board of Public Service from the city. Davis-Bacon Monitor will discuss more in depth these requirements with CDBG funded recipients or subrecipient. Section 3 overview. This is also a hot provision to make sure that they improve the local economy by providing when the project is awarding more than $300 in CDBG funding, this provision want to make sure that 25% of the total number of the paid labor hours are performed by Section 3 workers. Section 3 workers, those workers that they're low or very low individual, they locally reside in the project area. Or 5% of the total number of the paid labor hours are to be performed by targeted Section 3 workers. Targeted Section 3 workers are those workers that they live under the HUD assistance, like in HUD assistant housing, like Section 8. Or the Section 3 plan, Section 3 business certification. They also need to, the Section 3 coordinator from the CDA will coordinate all these things with you when you're awarded before the start of the construction project. These things will be discussed with you and go over every single of these points. Section 3 business certification, Section 3 worker certification, quarterly report, annual report, final project report, all these should be discussed with you, and you have to provide these proof to the CDA. In continuation, again for Section 3, project awarded 300,000 and more, CDA funding for public service facility improvement or construction are required to adhere to Section 3 regulation. Requirements apply to entire Section 3 projects, regardless of whether the project is fully or partially funded by HUD. Regardless of that, if the total development cost was provided by CDA under CDBG or not, you have to comply with Section 3. CDA must issue approval of the Section 3 plan submitted by the subrecipient prior to the start of the projects. So you have to submit your plan to the CDA Section 3 coordinator, and he or she will go through that to work with you, and also provide on-time reporting to the CDA quarterly or if required monthly. And also end of the year summary report must be all submitted to CDA. Next slide, please. Okay, Section 3 overview again. After all funding awards are announced, the CDA program monitor assigned to your project will issue notification of the CDA Section 3 coordinator of the new Section 3 projects. We will notify the Section 3 coordinator here at CDA, so he or she will reach out to you. The coordinator will contact you by email and to introduce themselves and also go through the requirement forms and documentation. Once all these forms are received, the Section 3 coordinator will contact with you if there is a necessary revision or any change or require more documentation and supporting documents are missed. They will reach out to you. After all revision and additional requests have met, Section 3 participant is approved, and you will be issued an approval letter from the CDA. Reminder: qualified subcontractor who are also eligible as a Section 3 business concern are intended to go prior under the HUD rules. So the Section 3 business concern are those businesses that at least 51% owned by low or very low individual that they're living in that area, or at least they're 75% of their labor for past 3 months were Section 3 individuals. They receive a preference than other under the HUD rule and regulation. Start working with CDA as early as to help to go through all this process. Once you notify that you are awarded, so we recommend if you have a construction project, reach out to the CDA monitor so they can start work early. Above, okay. BABA, there is a recommendation above our construction will not be permitted to start until Section 3 is approved. There's a general provision, so you keep in mind. Next slide, please. BABA. This is a recently passed provision, this passed in November 21st, 2021. All projects under HUD, they're receiving federal financial assistance will utilize material that manufactured locally in the United States, not locally produced or manufactured in the United States. Any project that receive 250,000 or more, they should comply with this provision, or whoever apply for CDA funding. They should also provide manufacturer certification for the material they're providing to that project. That certification should be provided to the CDA as a proof of that they are complying with the BABA provision. General waiver are available for exigent circumstances, de minimis or tribal recipients, and also project-specific waiver is subject to HUD approval. Next slide, please. Okay, construction requirement items. When you submit your application, you make sure you have a checklist with you to check everything you are providing. Project experience, which is your organization resume for your for its experience on the construction projects, which include the project name, scope of work, date, address, architect, GC, construction costs, square footage, and etc. Site control should be provided, project schedule, professional construction budget is not bid. So make sure we're talking about the pro forma here. Design documents, that's optional based on the scope of your projects. Photos, using online diagram from the CDA website. Interaction with the CD holding entity, if that's applicable. Experience with seal bids, Section 3, Davis-Bacon, if applicable. Description of any Section 106 and or environmental assessment conducted, if applicable. CDA pro forma. The following additional item needed for construction project prior to entering into the contract with CDA. Solidified by N from the CD holding entity, if you're acquiring any. Design documents, documentation of the Section 106. No construction or acquisition has taken place. When you apply for CDBG funding and assistance under CDBG program, make sure you don't touch your project until your application is approved or rejected otherwise. So then you can start the touch the project. Once you award it, we will make sure to conduct the environmental review. Once that clearance is done, then we will notify that, hey, you can touch your project now, start working. No procurement of the GC. If your GC is not included in your application, that was not approved when you apply for application, so you cannot procure that. You should wait until you announce your RFP, send us documents, CDA approve, and then you can go ahead, procure the GC for your project. Common RFP mistakes: not following instruction, making assumption, not reviewing your own proposal in advance of submission, not fully demonstrating needs, not fully explaining program design, not meeting a national objective or eligible activity, lack of realistic outputs and objective, not making any reasonable ask, not taking advantage of bonus point. The bonus point here is NARSA. That is a very important thing in your application to select that you will be serving NARSA or Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy area. That was designated by HUD, and also that's also targeted locally by cities. So they make sure they want to use the federal resources to improve the local economies on those areas. So you make sure you pick one of those areas and serve those areas if applicable. And that's a very important bonus point for your application. And also not fully answering each and every questions that is in your application. I think I'm done with the construction part. And there is a question and answer.
Yeah, so what we're going to do now is take a moment to answer questions related to the best practices and presentation that we just went through, and our fiscal team will take over for our fiscal management. So, Tom, I see a couple of questions that are, they've all been answered. 11 have been answered, and there are some still remaining. So we can tackle those and then move on to our fiscal
Hold on
team
one
members.
second.
Okay.
Yes, do we want to do all the questions at the end? I'm just seeing that it's now 2:38.
Let's do it. Okay, well, we can
And I
get
think we should
Brian
just
and
run
Sharon
through
ready.
fiscal. Yeah.
Okay,
And make sure we get this second half done and we'll just kind of go through it.
sounds good.
Okay.
So up next, we have our fiscal manager, Brian Yacom, and Sharon Worth, who will take over regarding our financial management best practices. I think you may be muted, Brian. I'm not sure. I hear you talking. I just don't see you.
Okay.
We hear you, Brian.
There we go. Okay, thank you. And I'd like to thank the program side for presentation well done. And
Okay.
now we'll move on to the fiscal side. Next slide, we're going to be talking about CDBG, financial management, and best practices. And there's just the uniform guidance offers general requirements for those receiving federal funds, and that's really what we're reporting on now. We're not so much getting into the specifics of CDBG, but these are just the general overall requirements coming from the uniform guidance. And of course, as it says on the next slide, it mentions 2 CFR Part 200. That's the uniform guidance financial management section. And so just some of the topics and objectives that we want to touch upon today is, what's the purpose and idea of financial management systems? Well, you want to have strong financial management if you have federal programs, and the regulations are geared towards forcing you to have those good practices. And we're going to define some of the key components that make up a financial management system. And then we'll describe how these components all fit together and to ensure that you are compliant and the money is used as intended and as efficiently and effectively as you can do it. So there's lots of definition about financial management and what is financial management, but for the federal funds and for the purpose of CDBG funds, there's a little definition here, and it just says it's the process of protecting and using federal funds effectively, efficiently, and transparently. And it's achieved through a systematic application of procedures, forms, rules, conduct, and standards. And I think I would just simply call those internal controls, the effective use of internal controls. And, federal regulations require adherence to strong financial controls, and as it ensures accountability and like I say, to make sure that the money is used as intended. Okay. So the core guiding principles behind these regulations is just to four of them listed here to promote integrity and keep the funds from being wasted. And all spending is planned, and federal government is big on budgeting. And I'll talk a little more about the budgeting later. And then it also helps to comply with the regulations. And that's really what internal controls are about. And an example will be, let's say you have clients that come in requesting your services, and you have an intake sheet. And that intake sheet might include a number of items to check on eligibility. So, that's just one way of ensuring that your everybody you're servicing is actually eligible for the activity. And so this all falls under a broad definition of financial management. And we strengthen the programs when they're operating efficiently, and we can provide more services for more people if we're effective and efficient in the use of our funds. So next slide, please. The key components of a financial management, and they're listed right here: cost principles, budgeting, procurement, internal controls, accounting and records, reporting, and audits. And I'm going to touch upon each one of those individually. So we'll start with cost principles. They actually define what's allowable and reasonable. And there's three critical questions that have to be asked for all costs. One is the cost allowed for our funding sources. Two, is the cost reasonable? Meaning, is it a cost that a prudent person would pay in this situation? Sharon will touch upon that in a little bit, more in detail. And can the cost be allocated to a specific funding source? And so those are your three main ideas behind cost principles. Budgeting, government's very strong on this. And your proposal will have a budget, your contract will have a budget, and all your financial reporting would be, you start with your budget, you list your expenditures by month, and then in the end column, the end result is what's still remaining to be spent. And so, this is, budgeting, it's required by the uniform guidance, and it's an ongoing check for reasonableness. It tells us how far along the project you are, and if you're actually spending the money on what you said you were going to spend it on, and you can take a look at your financial reporting and see how much funds are remaining, for your whole 12-month period. So you can plan on if you're going to have a problem or if you're accomplishing what you want, and you can adjust to that. And okay, next slide. Okay, procurement. Procurement is a big thing, and it's a requirement that the government really does enforce. And I think Gul mentioned here that the procurement has gone up to 15,000, and it was 10,000, and so anytime you have within the term of your contract, if you're going to expend more than $10,000 on any one vendor, make sure that you touch base with your program monitor to ensure you do procurement. And you don't want to come down at the end of the year in December and go over 10 or go over 15,000 at the end of the year, and then you failed to do procurement because you weren't expecting to spend that much, but you did at the end. So just work closely with your program monitor. Anytime you're going to go over any procurement threshold, touch base with your program monitor immediately. And so the next component is internal controls. And internal controls, it's a broad definition. It's really any tool, a device, a mechanism you use to ensure compliance. And that's the main thing. You're going to minimize the misuse of funds and poor record keeping. And it's, like I say, it could be from purchasing anything. No one person should have the authority to decide to order something and go out and buy it and require the bill paid. You have to have a series of approvals, and that's what we're looking for. Those types of things that you have an internal control policy, like I mentioned earlier, when you're doing intake for your clients, you want to check eligibility. You have a nice intake sheet that covers the key eligibility requirements, and you determine that from that if the person that's seeking benefits is eligible. And a lot of them can be just the financial piece where it leads into the financial reporting, but it's also an internal control is also on the program side. And so um, what we want to do is, when you submit your reporting every month, like every month you have a financial report due by the 15th, and you also have a programmatic report due. But on the financial report, we're going to look at the numbers that you present on the report, and we're going to compare that to what we have. And really, the numbers should match as far as expenditures and budgets and what your remaining funds are. And that's just to make sure that you're progressing as you had planned, and you're spending the money on what your contract calls for. And so that's just an objective, and that's that's internal controls just help stay compliant and help you not make mistakes. And okay, next slide. Okay, reporting. Reporting is a mechanism that the program staff and financial staff use to verify your documents, the tracking of the funds, and what have you. And then it depends on the nature of your contract. For instance, if you are in a public service area and you're doing a per unit reimbursement, before we make payments, we coordinate the program staff signs off on it as well as the fiscal staff, just to make sure that we're staying compliant. And the whole idea is in your contract, in your outputs, you say you wanted to serve so many people, and your programmatic report will state that, and your reimbursements are based on the number of people you're servicing. And so the reporting, we share back and forth between the program and the fiscal side. So there is a connection between your reporting for both the financial and the programmatic side, because before we release payments, we each side will sign off on the reports. And the other pieces, we have deadlines as well. Like we have expenditure deadlines. We get annual grants, and we need to see that you're on track to spend timely and complete the terms of your contract in a timely way. Otherwise, we're not going to comply with our requirements for the total grant. And so that's one of the reasons that we track these things through the financial reporting, and to see that you're on track by the end of 12 months to complete all the objectives in your contract before the next year rolls around. Auditing. The financial audits, we're talking about audits done by a third party, and that can be, independent of your agency. So you got someone neutral coming in that understands and knows the federal rules and requirements, and or the accounting guidelines related to reporting, and they're making a judgment on whether your reporting is accurate or not. And one of the things that you must do in your financial reporting is follow generally accepted accounting principles. Now, there's also other requirements. If your agency expends more than $1 million of federal funds, and that's not just funding from us. If you get other federal funds from other entities, and all the funds together exceed $1 million, you're going to be required to do a single audit, and we would be asking for a copy of that at 9 months after the end of your fiscal year, and again, there's more to it than just the audits. The audits only cover certain information, but it's all of your reporting together that we use to determine whether or not we feel that you're compliant and you're doing what's expected of you based on the terms of your contract. And so in addition to, your financial reporting and your audits, like if you, even if you're not expending $1 million, you may have an annual audit performed of your agency anyway. And you should also submit that to CDA if that is the case. But we have a monitoring team that goes out and visits you once a year, and we're just checking compliance on the key financial requirements and of both the uniform guidance and CDA's rules and the city's rules, and also there's some regulations specific to CDBG, and but that's something we would go into after awards are made. We would make sure you have information on additional auditing requirements and compliance requirements for financial reporting. Okay, next slide. Okay. All right, I'm gonna just turn this over at this point to Sharon, and so she can I'll join later on in the program and finish up on some reporting. But for now, Sharon, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Brian. So I'm going to pick up with the cash management. Brian touched upon financial management, and so I'm going to talk briefly about cash management and what that means. And just to summarize here, to highlight the different ways funds are received by the recipient, there are two basic methods by which that's done. The reimbursement method, which entails submitting invoices and actual expenditures to receive your reimbursement. And there's also the per unit method, which requires a fixed price to be established, as they spoke about earlier, and then a performance-based method. So this based on unit cost per activity. So that's primarily how your cash is going to be managed in those two ways. Next slide, please. And now we're going to dive into allowable and unallowable costs. It's a key subject here in terms of, what's charged to your contract, what costs are allowable, what costs are not allowable. And for the most part, they need to be applicable to your costs. It needs to be, if your grant is for a specific um, activity, you want to make sure that your expenses for that activity apply to your grant. If you are unsure of what those allowable and unallowable costs are, it makes reference to that in very much detail at the federal regulations 2 CFR Part 200, and then subpart E, which, like I said, goes into a lot more detail as to what's allowable and unallowable. Okay. Allowable costs is a general rule for under CDBG grants must be necessary, reasonable, adequately documented, must be in accordance with the accounting standards. They're treated the same across the board, regardless to what type of activity or what type of cost you incur in addition to the CDBG costs, and they must be authorized. They must be consistent with policies, procedures, and regulations, and just basically, the standard requirements. Next slide. And this was touched upon earlier, I think, on Brian's segment. You basically want to make sure that allowable costs are reasonable and necessary, and that they are what we call it the prudent person rule. What would a prudent person do? What would a normal person consider this expense to be? Would it be reasonable? And if so, then it's safe to say that those expenses would also apply or be allowable in your particular case. Next slide. Okay, some additional things to consider. Again, the reasonable factor is pretty standard. In I would say most cases, in all cases, you want it to be reasonable. But some other things to consider is does it have sound business practices? Is this expense going to make sense to the project or the activity that we're taking on? Is it compliant with laws and regulations? Of course, we don't want any illegal expenses or, what we'll consider unallowable or illegal activity to generate any expenses that would not apply to or would not be acceptable to the activity that we are projecting to do. And then what are the terms and conditions of the federal award? So you want to make sure that you're in compliance with those federal requirements to determine whether or not this is reasonable cost. Next slide. Here are some common examples of allowable costs. This is a short list. There are a lot more, but these are some of the general ones. You have bonding costs, of course, compensation of employees, salary, payroll, publications of printing, disbursement services. The just kind of peruse through these communications, telephone bills. I mean, sometimes advertising that would fall up under the publication and printing costs, rental costs. You just want to make sure that, in general, these types of things, apply to your activity or apply to your contract, your grant. Next. And of course, the flip side is the unallowable costs. Some of the more common ones that we see here. If you got, receipts or whatever, and you got alcoholic beverages on there, you make sure that you back those out. Any bad debt, cannot pass that through. Fundraising, you cannot get reimbursed for any fundraising activities. You can use other funding sources for that perhaps, but not CDBG funds. No sales taxes, no fines or penalties, no entertainment costs, no goods or services for personal use. So if you go to Home Depot and you're getting supplies and you grab a candy bar in the process, make sure you back that out. No candy bar. They do look at receipts. Okay, next. Okay. So just ask yourself in general, with regards to allowable costs, have you clearly identified the standards and procedures for your organization? Are they reasonable? Are they allowable? Does it apply to what it is that we're doing? And does it comply consistently with the federal rules? And of course, you want to make sure that they are, you want to make sure that they're not prohibited under the CDBG program. Next. Okay, accounting records and source documents. These are some examples, maybe not all, but at least in part, general accounting um, uh, journals and files. You want to make sure that you have a chart of accounts, you have a receipts journal, disbursement journal, payroll journal, general ledger. These come in different shapes, different forms and formats. Um, but you want to make sure that overall you're capturing this information and that it makes sense to the person who's going to be looking at it. And when you're asked for these types of information, it's easy for you to go to and to pull that information out. If you have an accountant or if you get audited, you have everything right there and you can easily access that information. All right, next. You want to make sure that the charges against your block grant funds are properly approved. You want to make sure it's supported by the proper documentation. You want to make sure that it's incurred during the contract period. If you started early, those expenses won't be covered. You want to make sure it's within your contract period. I think heard it mentioned earlier, don't start. I think that was within the construction section. Don't start until you got approval, because if you start beforehand, there's sometimes prep work that goes into these things, but your actual contract period is, and what you can substantiate by way of documentation will be what's acceptable. What's actually paid out and what's eligible. These are the things that you make sure you want to document and to cover. Um, let's see. Okay, again, it talks about fixed price versus actual expenses. So for your fixed price activity, especially, you want to make sure that you have the proper documentation. Reimbursement on for direct expenses is a little easier because you have actual invoices. On a performance basis, it's a little trickier. So you just want to make sure that you can substantiate everything that you're doing and justify, how you came up with the process for doing that. Next slide. Okay, personnel costs. Some of the common examples of eligible costs, what common documentation for those costs. For personnel costs, you basically want your payroll register. You want to show proof of payment of any payroll taxes, invoices for fringe benefits, maybe your insurance documentation that shows the detail of your employees, what they get paid, what they're covered for. What they're charged for the individual employee, not the family. Just make sure that your cost of reimbursement or your reimbursement that you're requesting covers the employee. And you want to be able to support that by having the document that shows where those expenses are recorded and how those expenses are paid out. With payroll, you want to make sure that you have a personnel schedule that's usually approved at the beginning of the process. If by chance that needs to be adjusted during the course of your contract, you want to make sure that you keep track of, when it's effective and who it applies to. And all of that should be again maintained in your files. You want to make sure that authorized people are personnel are approving documents, and you want to make sure that with your timesheets and other personnel documents that the employees sign as well as the supervisors. Okay, next. Some other eligible costs that you want to have documentation for, local travel. I think this was mentioned earlier too. For local travel, you want to make sure that any travel pertaining to your CDBG grant is approved beforehand, and city they adjust their like mileage rate and travel information on a fiscal basis. So every July, those mileage reimbursements are subject to change, and you just want to make sure that like any like out of town travel or outside travel, which happens far few in between nowadays, but you want to make sure that you get proper approval to do that before you actually incur those costs, and you want to make sure that it's covered under your contract. For professional services, again, we have here 10,000, that's now 15,000. So anything over 10,000 with any particular service or any particular vendor requires pre-approval procurement from CDA, and you want to make sure that you maintain your invoices for those services. All right, supplies, of course, basically invoices, bills, any purchase orders, requisitions, things of that nature. And as far as equipment, again, approval from CDA if over 15,000, and you have to have a procurement approved a procurement, and then you want to make sure that with the equipment you maintain your inventory report. So if this is CDA, if this equipment is obtained with CDA funds, you have an inventory report that you have to turn in at the end of the contract year. And if that equipment is disposed of, or if it's in some way kept on record um, during the audit or doing a visit, we might verify that it's there. If it's not there, we might want to know why, what happened to it. So at the end of the year, you turn in an inventory report. You want to make sure that equipment is documented on there. And if you don't have any equipment, you just say not applicable. So the CDA administrative assistant sends that out at the end of every year and request that information. So you just want to keep track of that. Next. Okay, more documentation for printing services. Again, invoices and like insurance. You want to make sure you have your show adequate insurance coverage as required in your contract. Next. Telephone communications, your telephone bills. Don't see too much of those anymore, but if you are submitting reimbursement for communication services, telephone services, your telephone bill has to be submitted with all pages. There cannot be any missing pages. Want to make sure that all the coverage and the types of services being provided are legit and eligible. And then if there's any facilities support for lease agreements, anything like that, you just submit your invoices or your bills accordingly. Next. And overall, you just want to make sure that I think Ryan, is this you again? Hold on. You want to make sure that your records are accurate, reliable, and up to date. Okay. Next. Okay, so we're still under source and documentation. You want to make sure your accounting records show primarily all of these categories here. So you want current authorization, obligated, unobligated funds. You want to make sure that it shows the amount that you're funded and actual expenses. Next. Some notable general questions, I guess, to ask yourself about the documentation, accounting records and source documentation is that, do you have, is your accounting system substantial? Is it up to date? Is it current? Are you able to retrieve the necessary information from that or as well as input it? And then trial balances and other types of reports can be generated on an as-need basis. That's basically a reconciling method so that you can keep track of where you are. It's best to do it on a monthly basis, but if not, at least quarterly. And you just want to make sure that everything is current and up to date and that you have your original source of documentation as opposed to copies of a copy of a copy. Okay, so you want to make sure that's on file. The different reimbursement types, administrative planning, construction, economic development, public services. We'll just highlight quickly on some of those. Next. Okay, reimbursement by direct billing of invoices. We've kind of touched upon this quite a bit. Again, it's just making sure that you have the actual invoices, making sure those invoices are relative to the project and the activity. And again, we have our $10,000 threshold, which is now $15,000. And you want to make sure you have the proper approval from your program monitor and from the fiscal staff. Next. Construction activities. Again, you want to make sure that you are properly or in compliant with the categories regarding Section 3, labor standards, programmatic, and also MBE, WBE reporting. Next. Home repair activities. The home repair program has various documents that are needed when when they request home repair services to be provided. This is kind of done in a different area, but we also review it as well once we receive the pay request. That package should include all the things that you see here, primarily, the scope of work, the deed, payout order, invoices from the actual contractor doing the work. The CBI clearance typically it doesn't even get to us unless that part has been cleared. And you just want to make sure that these items are included with your supporting documentation when you're requesting a reimbursement for your activities. Minor home repair, kind of some of the same things. These are also, like I said, done typically before the fiscal section sees these reports, but these are the things that we're looking for and should be submitted to be in compliance with your pay requests. And if, of course, they're not, that holds things up, so we have to go back and ask for those. Okay. Economic development. These are, business loans. Again, the documentation that's shown here is kind of what we're looking for. And then, of course, technical assistance. Technical assistance based on the service that you're providing and the number of people being served. And all these things, once again, are reviewed in your programmatic report. Public service, a fixed price for unit costs. We've gone over that. We want to make sure that everything ticks and ties with regards to that. We want to make sure that it's reasonable. And if there's any question about that, that's usually handled up front, either from the program monitoring section or, like I said, even in putting your application, your budget activity together. Some examples of units of service. There are different types of activities depending on, what your organization, the service provided by your organization. It can be delivering meals. It can be, garden planning. We talked before about maybe areas of street cleaning or alleys, lots, workshops that are being provided for home buyers, resource fairs, various things that are taken into consideration as types of units of service. Public service, again, performance-based. These again are units of service based on, as we just talked about in the previous slide, depending on what the activity is, your unit of service will be driven. I mean, your unit cost will be driven by the unit of service that you're providing. You just want to make sure that you have the proper documentation and that everything lines up accordingly. A lot of these documents we don't get to see in the fiscal section, but they will be supported and documented in detail in your programmatic report. And for like from the fiscal side, if even though you don't get reimbursed for like administrative costs and things like that, you still want to have that documentation on hand. So when you get a site visit and you need to be able to justify those expenses, you'll have everything on hand. Okay. The activity budget, what is it? And how do you get reimbursed on a per unit basis? Well, I'm glad you asked because the next slide is going to tell you. It's the total cost of your award, your overall program, those costs that are applicable to your program. And again, direct costs are going to deal directly with invoices, directly with direct costs that are associated to your daily activities. And then indirect costs are those that you can't readily identify. They might be combined with other objectives and other projects, but you can't single out, how much of that applies to this project versus another project. Those are your indirect costs. And for that, the government allows you 10% de minimis. So if you are not an organization that has your own indirect cost rate, which you would apply for from the federal government, they would issue you your particular rate. It could be 15%, 20%, whatever what is agreed upon. That's established upfront and is a part of your application and your the early on process. That's what you would use as your indirect cost rate. And if you don't have an indirect cost rate, a federal government federally approved indirect cost rate, you are allowed to take 10% to account for indirect expenses. So when you're reporting your financial expenses on a monthly basis, you can take 10% of your expenses and record that towards your total overall expenses. Next. Okay, with that, this just kind of sums it all up. Your CDBG payments must be supported by eligible expenses. Any unsupported payments have to be returned to the City of St. Louis to CDA. And then let's say when it says here that completion of activities alone does not satisfy eligibility of payment, that means just because you performed an activity doesn't necessarily mean it's eligible. Activities pertaining to your project, pertaining to your contract will be reviewed and evaluated as being eligible. So there could be a lot of activities going on, but only those that apply and that have been agreed upon in your contract are eligible for payment for reimbursement. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brian who is going to quickly wrap up the last part of this, and so we can get to our questions. Brian?
I'm good to go. This just covers the financial reporting. You have a monthly financial report. So your monthly financial report, when you execute, if you get an award from us and we execute a contract, the last page or the next to the last page of your contract will have a template of a financial report, and it covers all these items on this slide. So all you need to do is fill in the numbers. You start with your budget, and then there's a column for every month. You put your expenditures for that particular month, and then of course you get your totals, and at the very right-hand side is the remaining balance. So it's really we've tried to make it easy for you, and that these are requirements from the Fed. So by creating this financial report, we're trying to make it easy for both you and us to ensure compliance. So it is on the next slide. You have to submit the report by the 15th of the month, and if you don't, and then you submit a request for a payment, we will hold up the payment until you're current on submitting your reporting and your financial reports. So just keep that in mind. And the financial reports, you'll be assigned a fiscal monitor, and you can submit your monthly report by email to your fiscal monitor, and that way there's documentation that you submitted it because you did it by email, and then we can start the review and make sure that it's been reviewed by the time you submit any request for payments. So that's the big important thing about the financial reporting. And it's when we say it's accurate, we're talking about, we know how much we've paid you so far during the course of the year, and are those numbers reflected on your report? Timely means did you get it in by the 15th of the month? And then current, we're talking about once the 15th of the month hits, the most recent report should have been the end of the previous month. And that's if that's what we have on file, then you are current. Just little things like that. So that's all I got to add about the financial reporting. So the next slide, the federal government has kind of gone towards indirect cost, and these are kind of like some people think of them as overhead, like you got a copier, and you use it for everything in the office, and you got multiple programs. So how do you allocate it to the different programs? So this was an attempt, and the goal is to simplify that. And of course, it's to some people it's confusing, and some it's understandable. But the one thing they've done is they've increased the percent from 10 to 15%, and they're also increasing the scrutiny. So I know you guys have to have an annual audit, but so do we have an annual audit. And sometimes they check the our subrecipient monitoring, which is our monitoring of your reports. And there's some things that they look at on indirect cost to make sure there's no abuse. So there's been a misconception on indirect cost that, okay, it's 15% now. Whatever we submit for reimbursement, we get 15% of that is indirect cost. Well, that's not accurate. That's not how it works. You have to come up with a modified total direct cost. And And that's really what you're allowed to take for the course of the whole year. 15% of that. It used to be 10%, now it's 15. And then so bear in mind, when the auditors come in and they ask us if they see somebody that we're paying out indirect costs, they're going to ask us, can we see a copy of their modified total direct cost? And so I'm suggesting if you plan on using this, if you when you prepare your modified total direct cost, send a copy to us, and we can review it and sign off on it. Otherwise, we just want to, make sure you're compliant before we get too far along the year. So, next slide, please. Okay. I think most of us know what indirect costs are. And it can be anything from, like, I used a copier as an example, or any, like your insurance cost, or costs that really apply to the whole office, but you want to break it down into specific programs. That's really what an indirect cost is. Like I said, it can be called overhead if you want. But so next slide. So here's the basic formula of what you have to prepare. Is it's really your direct cost minus excluded cost, which excluded costs are limitations. And the reason the government does that is, they've studied the past requests for indirect cost, and certain expenditures kind of inflate the rate. And that's why they put limitations in there. They think it makes it more equitable and more reasonable, and relative to your actual indirect costs. So, the formula is is right there. Your grant award minus your excluded cost, and then you divide that by 1 plus your indirect cost rate, which in this case will be, in most cases, 1.15. So let's go to the next slide. I think that shows a little bit. So here's an actual example. So you've got a $500,000 grant. In that $500,000 grant, you might sub-grant with some individuals to do certain parts of the work or the activity. But you're limited to just $25,000 of that. If you give somebody, in this example, if you did 2 contracts, one for 30,000, one for 60, for the purpose of indirect cost, you can only claim the first 25,000 of those contracts. So in this case, you got the first contract, 5,000 is excluded. In the second contract, 35,000 would be excluded. And rent's not allowed, equipment purchases are not allowed, and direct client assistance is not allowed, because those really aren't, direct client assistance are not really costs that you've incurred in your administration. I mean, that's realistic. So look at the formula. If we get down, so out of the $500,000 grant, you're going to exclude the 5 and the 35 because they're over the subcontract amount of 25,000. Then you do not include equipment rent and client benefits. So your direct cost, actual direct cost, your modified direct cost basis, in this case, brings brings it down to subtract the 69,000 from the 500,000. So so your direct cost, are I don't see the number there on the 400. It's Okay, because you've got the 69,000. You take that from the 500,000, but anyway, you take the formula, go back to the formula. It's going to be the $500,000 minus the 69,000 and divide that. This year it would actually be 1.15, not 1.110. And that gives you the amount that the maximum amount that you're allowed to claim for that grant award for indirect cost. And so let's go to the next slide, and that'll show us how you request the indirect cost on a monthly basis. Okay, whatever amount you claim as direct costs that month, what you want direct reimbursement from us for, like say this particular month you had $30,000 in costs. So you're going to take that $30,000 and divide it by the maximum indirect cost that you're allowed based on the previous formula. And in this case, it would be 7.66%. So in this particular month, you're asking for reimbursement of 30,000 in direct costs. So multiply 30,000 times 7.66. I'm sorry, multiply the indirect cost rate amount, maximum amount, which is the 391 here based on 10%. So that's how you calculate the indirect cost that you're allowed. You don't just take a straight percent of your total cost because of all those excluded costs. And I think this is something that will be looked at when we get monitored. So we are tightening up on that, going on down the road on the indirect cost. So if you got questions on it, it's best to contact your fiscal monitor on this, and we can actually set up training. You can come in and we'll go over it with you. And so really, that's we highlight this because it is confusing to a lot of people. And if you come in, we'll try to simplify it for you. And a lot of people do not use indirect cost, and that they have enough direct cost to cover their entire grant award. So that's the route a lot of people go. So I think that wraps it up for fiscal. And if there's any questions, and I'll be willing to answer some. Rishonda, you want to take over again, or?
Great. Well, thanks, team. Thank you, Brian and Sharon, for sharing those fiscal details, and thank you, everyone, for your patience. I know we've gone a little long, so this is the time for Q&A. Christy, if you could finish sharing your screen. And so for folks still here, if you have any questions, you can put those in the chat or just raise your hand and we can bring you in and you can ask those live. So we'll just kind of start from the top down, starting with the chat here. Dave asks, can you fix the 10,000 / 15,000 and 10,000? So it looks like there's an error in the slides. Yes, we'll fix those in the slides before we post them to the website. So this workshop is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube, and we'll post both the recording and the slide deck on that main page for the 2027 CDBG. We do have a hand raise, so let's bring Taven on. Taven Brooks. Are Are you there? Do you want to ask a question?
I am here, and thank you for having me. My question is the process for a non-for-profit using a fiscal agent. How does that work in this process, or is that allowed to be used in this process, a fiscal agent?
To the team, any recommendations on a not-for-profit using a fiscal agent for applying for and using community development block grant funding?
Brian, did you want to take that question, or Sharon? I can just tell you directly that a fiscal agent is allowed.
I think that kind of answers it right there. I wasn't quite sure, like in what capacity a fiscal agent would be used, but I guess is that just to help you manage through um the setup process, or is this throughout the contract itself?
Throughout the contract itself. So
Yeah,
I'm
I
in the
mean,
non-for-profit. I've done the work. We have the background, but it's my 501(c)(3) has not been issued yet. It's in the process. So we did partner with a non-for-profit that has the fiscal agent and has received benefits and grants. So we were going to use them as our fiscal agent.
okay. Um, I guess that would be considered, is that professional services? So again, just depending on what the uh, funding is, or the um how much they're charging, it would determine whether or not you need procurement for that or something to that effect. But as Rashonda said, it's allowed, then it's allowed within the realms of the eligible cost.
And my last question to that fiscal agent, do they have to be local fiscal agent?
Yeah, unless the contract states so, I don't know that it has to be local.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, you can raise your hand and just come on the show and ask a question live. And then I'll just work through this chat. Um, Lois asks what is meant by activating vacant properties. I think that means, for example, like a vacant lot, doing an activity there, like a community garden or event space, anything but just vacant and it's non-active. There's some questions here about definitions, and I shared in the chat the CDA Community Development Glossary, very helpful link. So you can use some of our lingo. Also, HUD, if you Google and go to HUD's website, they have a lot of definitions. Roberto asked if we have a list of previously funded organizations. Yes, it's on that main webpage. There's a link to the press release about last year's awards. If you have questions about applying, now is your time to ask us. But we always suggest that people, reach out within the St. Louis nonprofit community. We're very generous community, and I think most people are eager to share advice. Dave asks, should non-paid positions such as a board treasurer be included in the personnel schedule? So like a volunteer position? Does anyone from the monitoring team want to answer that question about the personnel schedule?
I can answer that. Volunteer positions like board members do not go on the personnel schedule.
Great. Thank you, Amber. And then Dave also asks, what is annual salary in dollars and cents on the personnel schedule? I'm not sure I understand what that means, but Dave, if you're here, you can maybe clarify that in the chat or raise your hand. Dave asks, where do we get the number of LMI individuals in the area? I believe there's, here's Dave. Dave, we brought you in if you want to ask any questions.
Oh, I didn't know if that was on the personnel schedule. One of the columns was labeled salary in dollars and center. I didn't.
Oh, that sounds like a typo.
Oh,
Does anyone want to clarify for Dave?
I had that section, and if I'm checking for that error, it looks like it says actual salary per pay period in dollars and cents. I think cents is what it was supposed to say.
okay. And then on the other question I had about the LMI individuals. Yes. Yeah. Where do we get that number? Census reports from 2020?
Yeah, so HUD has the census tract data. They have a lot of data sets where you can go to HUD's main website and then put in the area that you are considering having your project or activity, and then that'll help it streamline for you. It's called the low to moderate income population by tract, and that will be census tract. That's one way. That way you can get it directly from HUD.
Okay. And then I had one other question was, what's the total amount of funding available in this NOPA?
Annually for the non-housing NOFA, it's around 4.9 or so million, but the numbers fluctuate, which is why we don't post that specific dollar amount, because it's dependent on congressional earmark, which we don't have yet. So these are estimates for the future cycle. We have to wait to see what Congress does, and then once they make their allocations to responsible entities, then we have a hard number. So that's why annually we don't post a number, because we don't have the money yet.
I see. Okay.
Great, thank you, Dave. Let's bring in Judy. Judy, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm Judy Jarvis from Jefferson County, and I really appreciate you guys having this class. We get our own money here from HUD, and somebody had shared your class with me to take today. And so some of the things you guys were talking about, egrams, is that a program for that you use specifically?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, it is. So egrams is a grants management system that the city has used. I believe I was just told by one of our team members, she's been running the slides, Lisa Jones, since 2015. And it's an acronym for Electronic Grants Administration and Management System.
And
And
so
it's a
you guys,
web-based software platform used by government agencies for this type of work and dealing with the life cycle and the application, the review, compliance, and closeout, and some reporting.
oh, and so that's how you reach out to your customers within St. Louis? Or do you have sub-grants? Are you reaching out to all customers in St. Louis or just sub-grantees?
So we fund the sub-recipient. We don't fund direct to the beneficiary or the end user.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so I'm wondering if that would benefit me to use or if we should be using it. Okay.
I think you should take a look at it, Judy. You may find it very helpful to deploy your federal dollars, and You said Jefferson County?
Right. Now, you guys use
Yeah.
IDIS also, right?
We use who?
You use IDIS?
Oh, IDIS, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's HUD's IDIS is so funny. We use the initials, but yeah, that's HUD's reporting system that we definitely report into. But we also have a grants management system that we use for these purposes for applicants and for the grant life cycle and the application and review and reporting.
And they also actually do the accounting in there for personnel wages and stuff. It's actually built into the e-grant system.
So we do not use that aspect of it. Our fiscal team is amazing, so we don't use eRAMs for that. But I'm sure there are aspects that maybe you would like to deploy, that so you would have to contact eRAMs for that level of.
Okay, well, I've learned a lot so much today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Our pleasure.
And Judy, we're happy to share. Go ahead and we're glad you joined and reach out to us. We'd love to learn more about how you do it down in Jefferson County too. So we can share and exchange. Yeah, great. Tiffany has a hand raised. Let's bring Tiffany in. Hey, Tiffany.
Hello. Thank you all for having this session. It's very helpful. I just have a question around, I heard a lot about don't start your project until you receive notice of funding. And I just wanted to know, so we actually do have a construction project in place at the moment. And it's at phase 1 that we're doing our construction. But I wanted to know if we could probably apply for funding for phase 2, and based on the phase 2 project and activities.
The short answer, Tiffany, is I think it depends. We would really have to see that. There's something called a choice limited action, which we stay very much so clear of. So we would have to see that. Also, this is non-residential CDBG, non-housing cycle. So we don't know if your construction is related to housing or not. So we would just need to see that before we kind of weigh in on it, if you plan to submit. Gould, did you have anything that you would like to share? I know construction was your purview for this presentation.
No, that was enough information for them, but once we receive the application and then we make decision from there. Once if they award it, and then they cannot touch the project until they, yeah.
Tiffany, would you like to describe that construction project a little bit more? What's being built and what was phase 1 and what's phase 2 looking like?
Right. So we have a construction project on Natural Bridge in Union, and we're doing phase 1, that's the bottom floor. And we want to do a phase 2, which is the top floor of that project. And if I mean, I can go into details of what's going to consist in the building, but I don't know if you want to know all that.
It might be helpful. Is it like a residential development or build
No,
out
this
for
is
a public
commercial.
service?
It's actually going to be a restore on the bottom floor, and then the top floor would be more of mixed use office space, and so it's all commercial.
Or
From what you
owned by a
said,
nonprofit?
yeah.
Yes, we're a nonprofit.
Okay.
I
Is that
don't know if
helpful?
it will necessarily be an eligible use. We would really like to see it because it would need to be for the public. So like a
Yes.
rec center, like a health center where anyone could come in at any given time. So I would just encourage you to apply for sure, but I'm not sure it will be eligible based on the description that you've given as of yet.
Thank you.
Hey, Tom,
Okay.
if you don't have any more questions just yet, I wanted to just, before we finish up, jump back in
Mhm.
and back up to Tavon, I think, who was asking the question about the fiscal agent, because I want to be clear that with the use of a fiscal agent, the organization itself has to be 501c3 eligible to use a fiscal agent. But a fiscal sponsor, which it sounds like might be the case of this situation here, would be for someone who doesn't have a 501c3 and utilizes another organization for a fiscal sponsor for that. The difference being the sponsor, if you use a fiscal sponsor, they basically have control over the grant and how it's operated. If you use a fiscal agent, on the other hand, they're basically just managing the fiscal aspects of your organization, but the organization itself still has full control of what goes on. So I just want to make sure that I make that distinction. And that being said, may not work in this particular case because of the funds are being allocated to the agency itself and not to the fiscal agent. So before if that's a consideration before moving forward, I just want to reiterate that you make sure of the distinction between one versus the other. And I think he clearly pointed out that they don't have a 501c3, but they were using someone who does. So I don't think in this particular case it would work. But again, you can talk about that more in detail if you intending to pursue grant funds. Okay, thank you.
Great. If anyone has questions, you can just raise your hand and we'll bring you on. I'm going to work through the chat and Q&A here. There's a question from Nora. Nora says, I think this will be for the fiscal team. The federal de minimis rate increased to 15% on October 1st, 2024. Can we use 15%? Is that a question that the fiscal team can answer?
Brian, we can't hear you.
Yes, you're right. It did go up to 15%, but we just did not change. We failed to change our example to make it 15%. But you're right, it is 15% now.
So we'll take a look at the slides and make sure they're accurate before I post them on the website there.
Okay.
Kimberly asks, they already have a DUNS number existing. Do they still need to apply for a UEI number?
Yes. Yes, they do need a UEI number.
And that's where you get at sam.gov, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. sam.gov.
It is free and start early.
Marcia asks if we can explain the $25,000 minimum request.
Your award request has to be a minimum of 25,000. No less than 25,000.
So to give you a sense of scale of what we're looking for in terms of proposals and ideas here at CDA. I'm looking through this chat and I think we've covered all the questions people have typed in. So if there's anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. I know we've gone long, so we appreciate your patience, learning with us. This is your opportunity if you're applying for 2027 program year CDBG to ask questions live with the whole monitoring staff here. So please raise your hand if you have any questions. If not, you'll have to write them in to cdbg@stlewis-mo.gov, and we will write you back and post all those written questions and answers to keep this process fair and competitive. So I know that we've gone long. People might want to get back to their day. So I'm going to count to 30 in my head. Here comes Tavon. Tavon, you have some more questions? Go ahead and ask.
Yes, I do. I have a lot actually, but I'm not going to be greedy.
Okay. Go ahead.
But my question is, new non-for-profits that have taken this journey to assist in this community endeavor, do you all look at them? Is the process for new non-for-profits, is it the same or is it more detail you require from them to have, given the fact they new?
So we don't have a different process for new nonprofits, but you will be required, which was presented earlier in the presentation, to have letter of recommendation.
Yeah, I heard that, and it was from someone that previously gave a donation, or I mean, that previously gave some funding. So we don't necessarily have that, but I can get letters of recommendation from other political figures and anyone else, all the people, and if that works. But from an actual funder, I don't. So how would that work?
Those are the requirements. So some things as required are just what they are, and we aren't able to make adjustments the same as with it's a compliance measure.
Understood.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions from the chat? Go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. Well, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, for your interest in this grant cycle, and for your interest in the St. Louis community and the hard work that you do, and by applying for these funds to make that work possible. And thank you to the CDA team for your hard work and your time today, and to STL TV, to Asia for facilitating this and providing her tech support. So, Rashonda, any words or farewells?
Just thank you, and on behalf of our Executive Director, Matt Moak, and the City of St. Louis, our mayor, we appreciate you and look forward to your submissions before 4 p.m. on the due date. Thank you.
August 24th. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And this recording will be posted on our website along with the slides and with some of those corrections we mentioned. So we look forward to sharing that and seeing your proposals. Okay. Thank you.